By the way, having a child in that world, just an absolutely insane thing to do. Like, did Jim really not want to wear a condom that bad? All right, I want to say this from the jump. I really like each Quiet Place film for a different reason. I think all three of them do something really well at different points. However, I find this film series incredibly frustrating. I think every single film, for every single thing it does right, it also does something strange and silly and clunky. And each film, in my opinion, is this close to being a great modern horror or action or sci-fi masterpiece, and they always just miss the mark of being that. They're not bad films, but they're this close. They are on the edge of glory, and they can never quite get there. So today I want to talk about all three films, get into the things I like, get into the things I dislike, and just kind of look back on this series because I find its legacy and its enduring place in pop culture incredibly fascinating. And obviously this film series, the initial hook that no one can make sound, is actually a great one. That's the reason these films have staying power, is because every time you show someone the first film especially, it feels like you're showing them this like interesting little like silent film for a while, and there is a lot of tension in the fact that no sound can be made. But my god, do all three films just have some clunky shit in them. So today I want to get into all three films. So first off, let's talk about the first Quiet Place movie. Now this movie was directed by Jim from The Office, John Krasinski. I feel like everyone knows this. It's also starring him and his wife Emily Blunt, and they are trying to navigate a world full of creatures that respond to like sound, right? So the whole kind of gimmick of the movie is like they have to be as quiet as possible or these alien creatures will like eat them or something. And the thing I really like about this movie is it's tight, it's efficient, it's a tight 90, all right? It's a tight 90-minute movie, and basically the whole conflict in this movie isn't like a story of how the world fell. It is literally just a woman trying to give birth in a world where you have to remain quiet or you die. It's a great idea. I also love the idea that their daughter is deaf. Again, like great ideas for a movie about not making sound. Genuinely like really great. Now from the jump, I just want to say A Quiet Place conceptually is like a 10 out of 10. It's such a great idea, and I think each film is pretty good rather than great. It's like an 11 out of 10 idea, and each one is like a 7 out of 10 in execution. And I find it interesting because when this movie first came out to me, it was a pretty good typical Hollywood horror film, all right? I thought it was like slightly elevated above the typical horror schlock we get from something like Blumhouse.
Dude, this is dark web.
What the hell is this?
You just delete it. Here.
It won't let you delete it.
But for some reason, it got a lot of indie cred, and it was being put in the same conversation as Hereditary by Ari Aster and Get Out by Jordan Peele, two elevated horror movies that came out around that time. And I'm sorry, I think this has aged like sour milk. I can't imagine in 10, 15 years time, people will be doing like re-releases of A Quiet Place for a 10 to 15 year anniversary. I don't think it has that sort of staying power. However, I do think when this movie is firing on all cylinders, it fucking crushes it. First off, that opening scene where the youngest child of this family just gets brutally wiped out is incredible. I love it. And I know it's a bit contrived with the whole rocket and the kid playing with the rocket. Like, yes, I agree. I can't believe the kid is that stupid. However, as a means to an end to establish the stakes of this world, I think it's a great opening scene. And it's one of the few times I will suspend my disbelief that a character can be this stupid in this film franchise. I also think the section where Emily Blunt gives birth is genuinely excellent. All of the stuff in the movie is coming together. You know, John Krasinski is sprinting to get to his wife. The fireworks are going off in the background. It's a really great moment. And for a movie that is so quiet, watching all these things take off is genuinely a breathtaking experience. But now I need to talk about what holds this from being an objective recommendation. This movie is full of frustrating characters and just insanely silly logic to get to the climactic moments of this film. The trap this movie falls into for a lot of the runtime is we need our characters to be incredibly stupid and make dumb decisions so we have some climax and so we have some tension. The amount of times a character says to another character, it's like everyone knows this. This isn't a cool catchphrase. Stop doing this. Like everyone knows not to make noise, or so you would think. It's this insane thing of like every time someone sees something scary or something like off-putting, a character will be like, shh, make sure you don't make any noise. It's like, is this like we know? And they have to know. On top of that, I know the children in this film are children, but they have literally zero survival instincts. And I'm mainly looking at the daughter. I find the daughter in the first film in particular, she is better in the second one, just the world's most frustrating character. I am sorry. I do have empathy for her. Being deaf in this sort of world would be tough, but the way she acts throughout this film without any sense of rationality or survival instinct is genuinely insane. First off, the conflict she has with her father, John Krasinski, makes actually like no sense to me. I know that she blames herself for her brother's death. Like, I do actually understand that. However, the dad doesn't. And she has this idea the whole movie that the dad secretly does. And I don't think the movie showed us enough examples of where she could really misconstrue that or misunderstand that the dad actually loves her. So the payoff at the end where he's sitting there going, "I've always loved you," should hit me like a truck. But it's like, I don't think that should be surprising information to her. On top of that, I saw a video essay talk about the fact that like, oh, John Krasinski is like a distant father and this tears the family apart. And that's why the daughter feels like her father, John Krasinski, doesn't love her. And I'm like, sorry, I disagree.
Lee is stricken with grief, so the whole movie he's obsessed with work and chores and overall survival, and in essence is pushing his family away.
In my opinion, this subplot needed so much more time in the oven because every chance he gets, John Krasinski is being a good father. He is organizing the family to make a soundproof room for when the baby comes. He is making sure everyone is safe. He is constantly cleaning up their noise-related mistakes. He's teaching them how to survive. On top of that, he is spending all his spare time trying to make sure someone else is out there or working on her ear implants to help her hear. And it's such a weird moment at the end of the film where she like goes down to his basement after her father has been eaten by the monster and she looks at like all the work he was doing on her cochlear implants and it's like, no shit. Where did you think they came from? Like every time he showed you a new one, what did you think he was doing? Like, of course he cares about you. And yes, with a few rewrites, you could have pulled off this plot, all right? If after their son passed away, you know, John Krasinski, the dad of the family, was shown to be like an alcoholic and really dismissive and like, if my family gets eaten, I don't care. What's the point of living? I feel like this arc would work. But yeah, the death of John Krasinski is pretty much the daughter's fault, all right? If they just stayed on that silo and waited for John Krasinski to eventually get back to them, they would have been fine. But for some reason, the daughter is literally like, no, we're not going to stay here because dad doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about us. He's not going to come looking for us. I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious? This guy that has basically at every turn tried to help your family survive isn't going to come back for you after he's told you he would come to that place and to wait there? Disagree. And that results in the boy falling in the silo. And that also results in John Krasinski having to scream and get eaten by the monster to save their stupid little lives. So it's like, in my opinion, the death at the start of the film wasn't her fault. That was the little kid's fault for putting the batteries in the toy. But this one, John Krasinski, is absolutely on her. And her character just drove me insane. I know kids are meant to be irrational, but unless the read we are meant to have of the movie is that she is so wrapped up in her own guilt for the death at the start of the movie that she projects her own hatred into her father, I don't think the plotline works. And I also don't think that is what the movie's going for, because John Krasinski somehow knows to say, "I've always loved you," as if he knows this tension is there. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I can't believe it. Secondly, logic things. All right, look, now there's a lot of things in this movie that if you want to nitpick, you can. Why don't they live near a river? Why don't they live under the waterfall? Blah, 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 blah. I am willing to excuse a lot of like logic things because otherwise we wouldn't have a movie, all right? Like I am willing to excuse a lot. One thing I cannot excuse in this first movie is the fucking nail.
Fiddle-dee-dee. That will require a tetanus shot.
First off, why is a nail put through a stair from underneath, poking out upwards? Then we realize that someone has actually bent it down, right? So no one steps on it. Smart thinking. So then later in the film, Emily Blunt is walking up with some laundry and her laundry gets stuck on something. And this person that literally plays Monopoly with fabric pieces in case it makes too much noise starts pulling at the laundry without even checking what's wrong, like risking the laundry falling over or something tearing or breaking. She just pulls and pulls and pulls. And she pulls with enough force, mind you, to unbend a hammered down nail. So now the nail is poking upright, and I just cannot buy for the life of me that Emily Blunt never checked what the bag was caught on. I can't buy it. I do not buy it. These characters are shown to really care about the amount of noise they make all the time. And she never goes back to be like, that could have been really potentially dangerous. Let me go check what that is. On top of that, later, she steps on the nail and like takes her sweet ass time to tell anyone, hey, like, be careful of the nail. Do not step on that. Like, it's insane to me. Why did she not come down, see the nail, and put a box over it? Like, it drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. And yeah, like, I know a lot of the tension in that movie is like, oh my God, who's going to step on the nail? What a great little like suspense hook. I disagree because it's like, I just can't get my head around the fact that characters would be this stupid who have shown to have great survival instincts. That's like the only reason this family is alive. But yeah, I just love all these moments in this movie where like a character will see something scary, already be quiet. Like, for example, the man that has like killed the wife, and then John Krasinski is like, shh, don't make noise to the fucking guy and to the young kid. It's like everyone knows this. Everyone knows this. If they are going to scream, it is a choice. On top of that, I love the scene where John Krasinski, right, goes down to the basement and talks to his wife after the baby is born. And she says like, you need to take care of our kids. You need to take care of our family. It feels like I've been watching a different movie as if like he needs this motivation. It's like, lady, he's been doing this the whole movie. Like, get off his back. Like, he does not need to be told this. He has been crushing this. I just feel so bad for the father in this movie. He is just constantly told that he's not doing enough, and basically he just kills himself to like fulfill this wish. Also, I just can't stand the scene where Emily Blunt like lectures John Krasinski on like, you need to take care of our kids. I'm like, yeah, he's been doing that. He's been taking care of all of you. Do you see this room that has been built, this plan he's set up to deliver your child? By the way, having a child in that world, just an absolutely insane thing to do. Like, did Jim really not want to wear a condom that bad? But all that said, again, I think when the movie is executing its ideas well, it's absolutely crush it. But unfortunately, in my opinion, it never meets the great moment that is set up at the start of that film. It never reaches the peak of that opening sequence. It gets close with the pregnancy moment, but that's it. The rest of the film is just watching dum-dums do dumb stuff the entire movie. So as a result, I say it's a pretty good movie. It's a pretty good movie that could have been astounding if people just acted like normal fucking people. But next, we have Quiet Place Part 2. Now, I know a lot of people hate the fact that they made a sequel. They thought Quiet Place was this untouchable, original horror masterpiece, and it shouldn't have been turned into a franchise because Hollywood just always wants to make money and stretch things out further than they need to. Hard disagree. This is my hottest take of the video. Quiet Place Part 2 is my favorite of the franchise. I think it executes the action chaos of these creatures the best in that opening sequence, that fantastic, like, artificial one take where the creatures are crashing down in that small town. Absolutely great. No action in Quiet Place Day 1 meets the level of action in this first sequence. And in my opinion, I was never scared by the first Quiet Place movie because the characters were so silly at different points. So choosing to make the second part more action, more spectacle, similar to Aliens, similar to what Aliens is to Alien. Like, now that we've seen the creatures and how dumb characters are, the creatures aren't scary. So making it an action spectacle is so fantastic. This opening section is great. And I think both movies, their opening sections, pretty much steal the show. However, in my opinion, Quiet Place Part 2 manages to pull off a few more great moments. Now, first off, the characters aren't as stupid or frustrating in this film. Right, so first off, the daughter isn't as frustrating, as annoying as she is in the first one. She actually finds the island. She is of use to the plot. She isn't just a problem that people need to navigate. Also, I think the son in this film is fantastic. And also, I would be remiss not to talk about how good Emily Blunt is in both films. She is very maternal and strong and powerful. She is a great commanding screen presence, and I think she outacts everyone in the film, except Cillian Murphy. Now, Cillian Murphy, what a great inclusion into the Quiet Place franchise. In my opinion, he completely steals every scene he's in. And I'm really sorry, John Krasinski, but I think Cillian Murphy completely steals this franchise in terms of male lead away from John Krasinski. He's way more interesting and layered and fascinating, and what we are meant to feel about his character is way more complicated and interesting than what John Krasinski was given to do in his first film. I also love the idea that he's kept the body of his dead wife upstairs because he can't let her go and can't move on. Really, really fascinating, and they don't really mention it again aside from the moment where the son sees it. A great moment. I also love that this movie is another tight 90. This one is basically they're checking whether an island has people. Also, I absolutely love the sequence where Cillian Murphy and the daughter are like on the pier and they basically start trapping people with sound to get the monsters to kill the enemies that are keeping them hostage. I love I love the moment where Cillian Murphy stabs the guy in the leg, gets him to scream, waits for a monster to come up and get him, and then jumps in the water. That scene is genuinely excellent. And in my opinion, if you can't be scary, you need to do stuff like this, because that feels like an incredible execution of the Quiet Place premise, in my opinion. And then we get the fantastic sequence where the monsters actually invade the island and it's just chaos. It's just all these people that were super calm just like 5 minutes ago being completely wiped out by one monster. I love the scene where they're driving around in the car and the monsters coming after them. Like, genuinely a pretty great action film. Like, I really like A Quiet Place Part 2. It's the one I have the least frustrations with. My only issue is I don't think it sticks the landing at the end. I find the sort of duality of the two monsters creeping up on the people a bit contrived. I find the fact that the boy was just happening to listen to the radio and go, oh my God, it's the sound we need, a bit, I don't know, it's a bit much, and it just starts to feel like a bit of a Hallmark Disney movie. The fact that the kids are like pushing the monsters away in sync. Like, I know it's meant to be sentimental and warm, and maybe some people at home really like that, but for me, it took it slightly too far. On top of that, there's this thing that the daughter does when she takes her implant to like kill the monsters, and she puts it against the microphone and she acts like she has Thor's hammer. And on one hand, I do get what they're going for, right? She's taking something that people would perceive as a weakness and turning it into this super powerful moment. But I think it's just the fact that like she goes boom, and it's like, really, she just needs to like lightly hold it, and she needs to hold it for a while. Like, it always looks a bit clunky and awkward to me. I do get what they're going for, but it's like, she's not setting off an explosion. It's a sustained sound. Like, it always just looks a bit funny to me. It looked funny to me in the theater, and every time I watch it since, I'm a bit like, I get what you're going for. It's just a bit cringe. I'm probably an asshole. I'm probably an asshole. Like, nothing's exploding. There is no advantage from smacking it onto the microphone as opposed to just holding it there. In fact, holding it probably would work better. However, I love Cillian Murphy's like facial expression in this scene when he's discovering what this cochlear implant can do. I also, like with these Quiet Place movies, it's like, did the military not realize that a high-pitched noise would fritz out these monsters? Like, we literally have devices made to like get rid of mosquitoes that make a high-pitched noise. Like, are you telling me not at one point a sound was emitted that like fucked with these monsters? Now, some of you are probably sitting at home going, Marshall, it was probably so chaotic that they didn't have time to figure this stuff out. And I would agree. And I really wanted to see that in A Quiet Place Day One. But unfortunately, A Quiet Place Day One actually skips Day One, and I will get into that complaint when I get to Quiet Place Day One. But circling back to these first two films, in terms of frustrations with this second film, I cannot stand that Cillian Murphy's little bomb shelter, that little furnace that he goes into to talk to people and to soundproof isolate himself. I cannot stand that he hasn't taken the time to actually try unscrew it or figure out a more elegant solution than the towel. All right, that situation to me feels like the nail from part one. It's a little less contrived, but still, I'm like, really? There was no better solution? You couldn't figure out a way to tie it up permanently? Like, you really want to put your whole life in the hands of a flimsy little towel that if the wind blew a bit too hard, you would be locked in there for the rest of eternity until you ended up like your dead wife. My fear is substantiated later in the movie, where a lot of the tension for the son is the fact that he's locked in that furnace. Next, in the first movie, the daughter was the one that through her stupidity made a lot of contrived horror situations. In this one, it's the son. He doesn't need to do anything except just sit there and take care of his baby. And for some reason, he decides to go snooping and scare himself when he finds the body of the dead wife and alert a bunch of creatures. Also, on top of that, I thought John Krasinski's character was given a really unfairly hard time in the first film. In this one, these women give Cillian Murphy such a unbelievably hard time. It drives me nuts. First off, he saves them when he could have let them die. He gets their screaming boy that has a mangled leg and like takes them into his shelter, says he'll look after them until they're ready to go, and they have the gall. They have the audacity to start giving him shit for never answering John Krasinski's like fire signal in the first movie. Are you guys serious? First off, John Krasinski saw those fire signals and never answered them. So first off, like, goes both ways. Secondly, what does Cillian Murphy owe these people? As he says in the movie, he's like, oh, you haven't met the survivors, they're evil, as if I'm going to risk that. Totally agree. Also, just like unrealistic expectations of man. Like, do you really expect him to do that? And then later in the movie, Emily Blunt basically goes, "You need to go get my daughter," and basically says, "Go risk your life because my daughter is worth it, and you should know that. You should do it for John because you let him down." She starts guilt-tripping Cillian Murphy after he saved all their lives into risking his own life. It's unbelievable. The audacity of these characters. Like, obviously ask him to go, but it's basically like cruel emotional manipulation of a man that just wants to like sit in his room and hang out with the corpse of his dead wife. So at this point, I thought Quiet Place Part 2 was like a 7 out of 10 and Quiet Place Part 1 was like a 6 out of 10. So I was really excited for Quiet Place Day 1 for a few reasons. I thought this franchise, in my opinion, worked better as an action series rather than a horror series. Again, I know, a hot take. And I also thought that making it a franchise made the first film look a bit better because the first film feels like a bit of a proof of concept for a greater series. So I can be less harsh on that first film. So I was excited for A Quiet Place Day 1. And look, in some ways, this is the best film. So I showed my girlfriend in anticipation for this third one, the other two films, and she likes this one the best. She says, "Oh my God, thank God, this is the one with the least stupid characters." And I have to agree with that sentiment. The characters in this movie are brutal and they don't do a lot of stupid things. And when they are doing something stupid, it's earned, it's emotional, and they're both acknowledging it. The driving force of this Quiet Place Day 1 movie is that a cancer patient basically knows she is going to die anyway and really just wants to go into town and get her favorite slice of pizza as like essentially a last meal. So yes, on paper, that completely disobeys survival instincts. However, this is a part of the plot. This is crucial, and both characters going on this pizza expedition know this. It isn't treating the audience like a bunch of idiots. Also, people get killed in this movie for making noise by other people. It's fantastic. There's this moment where this guy basically sees that a bunch of bridges that could have been their escape route have been demolished, and he starts just hysterically screaming, "We're gonna die! We're gonna die!" And Digimon Hansu from the second film like covers his mouth and goes, "Stop making noise, like stop making noise, like shut the fuck up." Moves his hand and the guy keeps screaming, so Digimon Hansu knocks him out, kills him. A great moment. I love that you see his son run away from him. Also, I actually really like that they brought his character back from part 2 here, and it's actually really eerie knowing how his story ends in part 2 in this prequel. It's really well done. Also, Lupita Nyong'o does a great job as the lead here. I also love the inclusion of Alex Wolff from Hereditary. I think he does a great job in his small role. It was actually genuinely surprising when he gets picked off, and I really like the conflict that occurred between him and Lupita Nyong'o's character. Basically, this thing of him saying, "Hey, I know I promised we would get you pizza, but we actually have to go home to the cancer ward." And the fight they have there is really actually quite well written and well done. Much more well written than the conflict between John Krasinski and his daughter in the first one. I absolutely love this conflict here because you understand both sides. You feel like Alex Wolff's character is actually really hard done by. I had a lot of empathy for him, and the fact that he gets picked off early before they really have a bunch of resolution around their conflict, I think is really effective. I also love the co-lead played by, I believe, Joseph Quinn from Stranger Things. I think he was excellent. He was really sweet, and all the emotional moments in this movie actually hit really hard. I love the fact that basically he really wants to survive and she's a lot more impartial to it. It's a concept we've seen explored before, but I think it's really well executed here, and they have a lot of sweet, warm, tender moments between them, and I love that they value each other's perspectives. A great sequence, and I really like that they let these sweet moments play out. However, my big issue with this movie is, first off, the effects and the CGI look like absolute dog shit. It is clearly not shot in an actual city, and pretty much every establishing shot of when they're in front of like this abandoned, dilapidated city looks like a PlayStation video game. It completely took me out of the movie, and it's really disappointing because the first two Quiet Place films feel like you can touch them. It's one of my favorite thing about those first two films is everything feels tangible and rustic and a bit grainy. Like it really feels lived in. All these sets feel really well thought out and designed. And in this one, it's a bunch of like CGI backdrops. It's really frustrating. Next, it's called Quiet Place Day 1. I was really excited to see a more elaborate sequence like the first section of A Quiet Place Part 2, where it's just these aliens going absolutely nuts. Oh my God, people don't know what sound, so everyone's being thrown around and flipped around. We get that for about 22 seconds, and most of it is just in dust and ash and like 9/11 imagery, weirdly enough. Like you don't actually get to see it. And then Lupita Nyong'o's character gets knocked out and we miss day one. She like wakes up later and this massive group of people already have shelter, have already figured out not to make noise. So it's like we missed all the chaos of people not knowing not to make noise and trying to figure it out and narrowly escaping, which should have been the selling point of this movie. There's this great moment where the main co-lead, the Stranger Things guy, throws a rock through a car to set off a bunch of alarms so the monsters go there instead of them. So refreshing to see people actually do what I would do in this situation. On top of that, I absolutely love the sequence where inevitably Lupita Nyong'o actually sacrifices herself and like bangs the cars to let him escape. It's a great moment, and I also really appreciate that she doesn't actually die there, because I think the final shot of this movie, like all three films, is great. I absolutely love the final little moment of this movie. Basically, Lupita Nyong'o, knowing she's going to eventually pass away from cancer regardless, walks out into the city with a boombox and then chooses to play it out loud, and a monster appears behind her. Cut to black. It's tragic, it's sad, it's effective. I do wish the character writing throughout the movie was a bit stronger so it really hit me like a truck. But you know what? I think it's ballsy for a mainstream Hollywood movie to basically end with self-deletion like that. I think it requires a serious amount of gusto. I really appreciate what they did here. My big frustration with this movie is I wish we saw more of the military. I wish we saw more of actual day one. I do wish it went a bit louder, at least for the first 30 minutes. But I do have to give Quiet Place Day One a bunch of credit for being so reserved in the back end and really just exploring these characters that are trying to make sense of this crazy world. Look, there are a few points that are a bit frustrating, but for the most part, this does have the least annoying logic, even though out of the three films, I would say it's probably the worst looking and the worst made and has the worst pacing. It is on a technical level the worst Quiet Place movie in terms of technical aspects and how it looks. However, it is the least frustrating because the characters are finally acting like normal people. Thank the Lord. Also, thankfully, this isn't a Quiet Place movie you can just skip. This isn't one where you're going to watch the main Quiet Place movies and skip day one, because you actually find out a lot of lore and interesting things about the monsters. You get these like long looks at how the actual like design of their head works and how it like moves towards sound and can actually like feel things. It's really, really interesting, and I love how much time is given to showing us the anatomy of these creatures. I also love the section where they're kind of like eating or like ingesting, or like, I might need to see the movie again. I didn't get a great read on what these monsters were doing, but there are like these egg things that they're like looking at and engaging with, and it seems like eating. So it makes me wonder what they're actually doing on planet Earth, what they're trying to do. It's actually really interesting to see that these monsters hang out in groups and communicate and like are trying to lay eggs or eat or whatever the fuck they were doing. So yeah, looking back on it, as I talk about it more, I really did like A Quiet Place Day One. So in the hottest take of hottest takes ever, my ranking would be Quiet Place Part 2, then Quiet Place Day One. And honestly, like if someone made the argument that they like Quiet Place Day One better, like I would hear them out. I think they're pretty close. And then significantly lower than that is Quiet Place Part 1. I know that's a hot fucking take, and I know most people out there think that this series should have ended after the first film, but yeah, no, I disagree. If the series ended at the first film, I would not have watched that movie again. I would not even think about the movie twice, but I think the fact that it is a franchise and it's a pretty decent, like, mainstream Hollywood franchise is really interesting. I just wish that each movie took the strong points of the other movie and cut out the weaknesses, but unfortunately, every single film just has these logical things that you just need to look past. It is an almost great franchise that I would universally recommend to everyone. It's so close, but it's just not quite there. And that's why I find the Quiet Place franchise to be one of the strangest franchises that are out at the moment. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe, please hit like, please let me know what you'd like me to talk about as well. I'm thinking of starting a podcast for Patreon members. I will set all that up. Please let me know if you'd be interested in a weekly or fortnightly podcast where I basically speed run everything I've been watching, everything I've been viewing, everything I've been reading, everything I've been listening to, just for like big fans of the channel. But thank you so much for watching. If you've been here for a while, thank you so much for continuing to watch. Have a lovely day. And again, please let me know what you'd like me to talk about next.